neste innlegg eller foredrag her nå vil jo foregå på engelsk, som de fleste har forstått. Håper at de fleste får med seg det meste. Foredrag, det er ikke nevnt tidligere, men det som av foredrag vil jo bli lagt inn på Midtnorsk kompetansesenters ene websida, sånn at det vil være mulighet for å hente det også der da, i forhold til det her med å sitte og notere og så videre. Det er da en stor glede å introdusere neste foredragsholder her. Det kan ikke gjøres på en helt enkel måte. Det er da Dr. John VanDenBerg, Berg sier vi på norsk, som har tatt plass her, som skal fylle de neste 2 timene. Jeg har gjort en avtale med en om at den ikke kjører 2 timer, den kjører cirka 45 minutter.
County, whatever, I'm really talking about all of Norway now, okay? Right now, you're speaking for all of Norway. I want you to rate Norway from 1 to 10. 1 is you're not collaborative or integrated at all. Right? You won't even talk to each other, okay? So if you work at mental health, you won't even talk to the people at child welfare, okay? 10 is you're so collaborative or integrated, you're just hugging each other and you love each other and you work together all the time and it's just, you're singing We Are the World together, okay? All right, so 1 is none, 10 is everything, all right? We're going to rate these separately. First, we're going to rate collaboration. Okay? Now, I've done this a lot with audiences. And I've learned the way to do this to cut down on peer pressure, because we kind of look around and who's rating it how. I count from 1 to 10 very quickly. And when I get to your number, you raise your hand like this. Okay? Everybody ready? Okay, now we're going to rate them separately, just for collaboration. Now, are there any questions about my definition of collaboration? You understand? It's a good thing. It's a positive. We're working together. We know each other. But I'm still going to make my own decision. Okay? That's collaboration. Okay, everybody got it? You need a number from 1 to 10. Everybody ready? Everybody has to do this for this to work. All right? Okay. Here, I'm going to count from 1 to 10 very quick, so you have to be ready. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, now, I magically average those. I would say you're about a 5. About a 5 or a 5 or maybe a 6. Maybe a little better on collaboration. Okay? And that's good. That's good. Now, we're going to do integration. Again, integration, to define it, is we recognize we can't possibly get outcomes with a family if we're coming at that family from different directions. And most importantly, if the family doesn't really define what it is we're doing. You know, that family-driven, that family determination piece of this. So with integration from 1 to 10, everybody got a number? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, some of you beat me to 1. But I would average that to about 2.5. Maybe 3. In university, I learned a term, statistical significance. And that's when you really have a significant difference between 2 ratings. And you have a significant difference between those 2 ratings. Here's my question again. Why? You don't need to move the mic around. Are you recording this? You're not recording it? Or are you recording it? But if you need it for that, it's fine. But otherwise, Mike, and it's a very serious question. And it's the heart of whether or not Wraparound will work in Norway. Can you make a movement from collaboration to integration? You have twice as much collaboration as you do integration. Now here, get ready for this. It's just one thing I want you to learn this afternoon, is that Wraparound is a process of integration. It's how we come together as systems when we're working with families that have complex needs across systems. It is a process for how we come together. Okay? All right. And that's all it is. It is a technique. It is a process. It's a way that we all sit together with the family under a common set of values like strength-based and individualized and culturally competent, and come up with a plan. That's what Wraparound is. It's a process of integration, all right? But why such a huge difference? And just help educate me here, because I'm ignorant about Norway. Why it's such a huge difference between your two ratings? Anybody? Just very loud if you would, so we can hear, and I'll repeat. Why such a huge difference? Go ahead.
You have so many different systems working with applying your family.
Okay. So clearly, with some of your children and families, you've got a lot of different systems in there. Okay? All right? But why? Why such a huge difference? Why so little integration relatively? Anybody else? What would you say right here?
I think it's a different between which level the head has, because in a small community it's more integration.
Yeah.
But when you go up in the health system, they're bigger and they're
And our colleagues is absolutely right. In a smaller community of several hundred people, everybody knows everybody, all right? And somebody from juvenile justice talks every day to the person from the school. The bigger communities, though, you start to lose that. That's absolutely true. Go ahead.
Well, maybe also an idea about the welfare state. We have this mental idea about the welfare state, that it's all the organizations. Someone else outside the family is taking care of the problem. It's kind of mind that you have to change a little bit, that the family itself can take care of it.
Yeah.
Compared to Southern Europe, where you have this opposite way, you talk to your family first, and then just second.
Yeah.
They're saying it's the state. In Scandinavia, it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah. So in the Nordic countries, there's more of a focus on welfare, or the state is going to care for you.
A part of it, yeah.
Part of it. Okay. All right. Give me right here.
We want to look good. We want to be the one who solves the problem. I want to come out in the other end and be the one that makes the standard.
Yeah, and I think what you say is very much an issue in the U.S. I want to be the one that solves the problems. I am going to fix this family. And they come along, and I think, why do we get into human services? Why do we work in this field? You can make more money almost anywhere else. Seriously, you can. In Denver, where I live, in Colorado, where I live, a plumber, a person who fixes pipes, makes more money than a psychologist. Why do you do this? Well, you want to help people. So you say, I'm going to be the one that helps this family. Yeah, that is an issue. Go ahead, sir.
There is a competition between different services for economic or financing from the state or municipal. And they want to show all our services is the best.
That's right. That's right. And
the professionals say want to use their own hill and they won't cooperate or integrate. But there has been a change in Norway. We have by law there is something called individual plan.
right.
And people that are in need of long-term coordinated services can get an individual plan if they want. And an individual plan is an integration of the different services.
Yes.
So there's something new.
So clearly there's some improvement. There's a and let me ask you this. You've got a law, and I read the law on your governmental websites. You really have, especially since about 1998 on, there's a real recognition of the need for integration. You don't need to raise your hand on this, but I'm going to ask you, do you feel like it's working? I don't know, because I don't know Norway at all. I've never been here before these last few days, okay? I know in Colorado, and I'll speak for where I live, it's been very, 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 very difficult to move to an integrated model. But that's why Wraparound exists. That's why Wraparound is there. It's so that we have a process of doing that. Okay. Thank you all, and I'm sorry to make you all work so hard today. So, all right. So, let me tell you a little bit about the research. Do you have this term in Norway, evidence-based practice? A lot of focus on prove it or lose it. You better have the research results, right? And in the last 5 years in Wraparound, we've had a great deal of research published. In the U.S. Right now, our federal government, our national government, funds huge amounts of research on Wraparound, and we've been very lucky. But some of the research says that high fidelity wraparound, and when I say high fidelity wraparound, I mean wraparound done according to our new national standards. Okay? If you want to see them, go to Google. Y'all know Google, right? Go to Google, put in National Wraparound Initiative, 3 words, National Wraparound Initiative. And what will pop up in Google is our new national standards for wraparound. Okay? But we see increased permanency and stability for children, decreased restrictiveness of residential, improved behavior and mental health symptoms, improved school and early care outcomes, decreased family and child safety issues and risk factors, increased family and child protective factors, things that keep them safe, increased family engagement and satisfaction of services. So we feel like this is, again, very simple stuff. It says, we know many of our families have complex needs, so we need a process of coming together with the family. When we do this well, we get good outcomes. So I'll give you some examples of that after our break. But let me just, got about 5 minutes right before our break. There's another term that we're going to have to know to understand wraparound, and that's the term system of care. It's really how a community comes together to take care of its own. A system of care could be a municipality, a county, or a city municipality. It could be a neighborhood. But it simply says, in this neighborhood, in this community, it could be Trondheim overall, it says, we are going to make a commitment that when we have families with complex needs, we're going to care for them. It recognizes that child and family needs may not always fit our pretty little models of child welfare, juvenile justice, but it still respects each agency's societal mandates. I really believe we still have to have child welfare. We still have to have juvenile justice. We need health. We need labor services. We need these things. It's an organized network of formal and natural support providers who come together to move to an integrated system. And what you'll hear for Toronto tomorrow is how they've approached that, how they've come together in that network. It'll be a good example. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because you'll get to hear from our colleagues in Toronto. Now, one last slide here, and then I'll let you take a break. Here are the principles for wraparound. These are the values or principles behind the National Wraparound Initiative in the U.S. Number 1, family voice and choice. The family has a voice, they have a choice, period. That's the way it is. Team-based. Simply says that we believe in coming together in a small team. The family chooses their team, 4 to 8 people. As I said earlier, we believe in natural supports. A good wraparound plan is primarily natural supports. We believe in collaboration and integration. We believe in being community-based. Now, one of the issues that I saw frequently on your governmental websites was the issue of sometimes communities moving their children to other communities so the other communities could take care of them. Has that been an issue that comes up from time to time? But this says, no, if a child's from Trondheim, we're not going to move him to anywhere else. They're going to be here. We're going to make a commitment to that. Culturally competent, as I said, just that unique aspect of that family. And let me give you one more example of this. How many of you have pets? How many of you have like dogs, cats? Okay, all right, good, yeah, all right. Now, we love our cats and we love our dogs, right? I have a dog and a cat, all right? But we have different attitudes about our pets, right? I was raised on a farm, and we had dogs on the farm, but we wouldn't. Our dogs didn't go to the veterinarian very often, if you know what I mean. We loved our dogs, but they were farm dogs. They were outside, they didn't come inside, but we loved our dogs. Okay? My wife is a city girl. My wife was raised in a city, and they had pets, and their pets were part of the family. Okay? Their pets were like, they would do anything for them like they would do it for any family member. So when we got our dog Grover 13 years ago, we learned that we had different cultural opinions about pets. And my wife says, he comes in the house. And I go, no, he stays outside. He came in the house. Okay? Well, the puppy gets a little cold. He gets a sneeze, And I said, he'll be fine. My wife says, he'll go to the vet. He went to the vet. Okay? So, but we love him, and now all these years, he's now 13 years old, okay? And he's really arthritic. He's having trouble walking around. He's having a lot of trouble. And my wife takes him to the vet, and the vet recommends acupuncture for pets. Okay? And I'm going, acupuncture for the dog? I said, right, you bet. And I said, how much is this going to cost? How much is the acupuncture? He said, it's $100, and he'll need per session, and he needs 25 sessions. And I said, damn, honey, I'm going to miss that dog. Okay? This is culture, right? Well, anyway, he got the acupuncture. $2,500, just push, and didn't help at all. The next thing, my wife has the dominant culture in our family. The next thing he got was therapeutic pet massage, where we had to learn to massage. I'm not kidding. I'm not joking. All right. But it's just what it is a difference in perspective, a difference in culture, right? And I guess my point, just one more time, because I think this is so important, is that do you know the culture of the families that you're working with? And if you were to go into any agency in Norway and pull out a plan and read that plan, could you see the culture of that family in that plan? And my point here is, if you can't, it's probably not going to work as well. And part of Wraparound is learning how to understand and assess that culture and put it into place in that plan. That's why it's so important. Individualization simply means that every plan is different. Every human is different. Let's make them different, really different. Strength-based, again, we know. Persistence is, we don't give up on anybody. We don't ever give up on a family, period. Now, a family may give up on themselves. You ever had a teenager that gave up on themselves, and you just look at them and you go, how could you give up on yourself? You're only 15, But we don't give up on them. We're there for them. Outcome-based and cost-responsible means that we better collect our outcomes. We better make sure that we're using these dollars well as we spend them. So what we're going to do when we come back from break, take a 15-minute break, if that'd be okay. 15, okay. 15-minute break, and I'll walk you through what the wraparound process actually does at the family level. So let's take 15.
Prioriterer skal nå. Vi har tid frem til 3:30. Heldigvis så jo som innledningsvis sagt VanDenBerg tilgjengelig for oss på miniseminar og 2 småseminar på torsdag og fredag for dem som melder seg på det. Vær så god, John, and I'm there to call you John.
John, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. You bet. Thank you. I've the only person in the whole world that has to call me Dr. VanDenBerg is my older brother. And if you have an older brother, you'll know why, right? He stole the covers. He terrorized me, and I say now you call me Dr. VanDenBerg. But let me just ask, and if there are any questions or comments or observations that anybody would like to share before we get started again. Any questions come up during the break? Anybody? Okay. wanted to just come back to a point that I made about the risk factors that are affecting the family in the U.S. and in Norway. And the recent study done by Harvard University in the U.S. that said that the two things that are really having an influence on our society, number one is the loss of somebody who has, as a child now, the loss of somebody who has time for you, and the loss of somebody who has your best interest at heart. Okay? That those two things seem to be the primary variable in why we're seeing our children and youth get worse. Addiction. How many of you work primarily in addiction services to work on the addiction end of this? Okay, all right, so quite a few of you. But we're seeing really addiction becoming a huge issue, just an enormous problem. And yet, clearly, the addiction issues have a risk factor here. So I want to do a quick exercise with you to make this point. And this is, and again, it's for my benefit to see if there's been a change, because I don't know Norway. So, once again, you're going to need a sheet of paper in front of you to do this, all right? You're going to have to work just a little bit more, all right? Okay, now, what I want you to do is imagine that you're 10 years old, okay? For some of you, that's a long way back. For some of you, it's just, 10 years, all right? So imagine you're 10 years old, and I'd like you to think of the people who were around you at that time who met the definition that I just gave, which was they had time for you and they had your best interest at heart. They were really looking out after you, all right? They had time for you every day and had your best interest at heart. Maybe not every day, but, within a week they had time for you, okay? So I'd like you to write down just initials. Again, this is private. You won't have to share this, okay? Just write down, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Write down as many as you can. Think back to when you're 10. As many people that had time for you and had your best interest at heart. Starting now. Just write a word or an initial or a name. More seconds. Okay, stop. Now, could you count up the number of people? Count them, please. Okay, now, let me ask you this. How many of you have, by show of hands, how many of you have 2 or more on your list? Look at that. Look at that. How many of you have more than 3? More than 4? More than 5? And you're very lucky people, having more than 5, right? To me, this is very important for Norway, very important for the U.S., which is, has that changed for many of the families that you see? Now, the research in the U.S. says this, and it's very important for Wraparound. If a child has one adult who cares about them and has time for them, they almost never show up in services. And the exception is when there's mental illness for really a biological reason, whether it's something in the brain that's going wrong, okay? But for things related to the environment and the stress of the environment, if they have one person in their lives who has time for them and has their best interests at heart, they almost don't show up in the systems. But if they have 2, it's almost non-existent. And 3 or 4, they just almost never show up. All right? Now, I'm not going to ask you how many of you showed up in the systems as teenagers, right? That would be too intrusive, all right? But I always think about it. I think back to myself. As a youth, what kept me going was often the fact that I did have a couple people, at least maybe 3 or 4, who had time for me and had the best interests at heart. And I guess if you were to look at the children and families that you're seeing out there across Norway right now, how many people do they have in their lives? Is it a 0? Is it 1? And the wraparound question becomes, can we rebuild that a family at a time? Now, a nation at a time, sure, that would be great. I don't want to be grandiose. All we ask in Wraparound is for this family in front of us right now, can we rebuild family around that child? And the answer we're finding is yes. And that's really the intent of Wraparound. This is very simple stuff that's very hard to do, and I want to push that again. Let me illustrate this with a little story. First of all, one more question. I'm going to have lots more questions. It's not just how many of you work in the same professions that your parents worked in? In other words, your dad was a social worker, you're a social worker. How many of you work in the same profession as your parents? This is 4 or 5 of you, okay? For all the rest of you in the room, other than those 4 or 5 people, have you ever had any trouble telling your parents what you do for a living? They don't get it, do they, right? They don't get it at all, So, and my dad was a farmer. And, my mom was sort of a nurse's aide sort of person. And every year I'd go back, when I was living in Alaska and Pennsylvania and Kansas and everywhere else, I'd go back to visit my parents on the farm. And every year my dad would say, Johnny? He says, it's not John, it's Johnny, He'd say, Johnny, what do you do exactly? And I'd say, and I don't know about you folks, but, I'm 55 and I'm just a big kid, And you want your parents to know what you do, And I'd tell them, and my dad would look real confused, and he'd change the subject, Finally, one year he said, Johnny, could you write it on a piece of paper so that if the relatives ask, he could just say, here, read this, And so the next year I was ready for him. We had just published a book about our Alaska experience called One Kid at a Time. And we had some new research that we had done on Wraparound, and I was ready for him. So we go to visit. My dad asked the normal question, what do you do anyway, And I said, why don't you and Mom sit on the couch here, and I'm going to tell you what I do for a living. So about a half a day later, my mom says, you can shut up now, I think we got it, Probably what you all said about a half hour ago, And the first thing, actually, you just have you ever been around Dutch people? We're a little thrifty, And the first thing my dad said was, people pay you for this? He was just astonished, And the next thing he said was, isn't this just take care of your own? And I go, yeah, Dad, that's all it is. And that's all this is. Okay? It really is all it is. All right? It says, for this family, can we construct a little community around them that takes care of their own? All right? Can we do that? My mom, and you have to understand, I'm 6'4" tall. My mother, when she was younger, was 5 foot tall. She's now 89, and she's like that tall, And my mother she looks like Mother Teresa, just a little tiny woman, And you look at her and you look at me and you think, not biologically possible, but she is my mother. And my mom said, Johnny, she said, isn't this just about good manners? She said, why would you ask somebody what they needed and then give them something else? That's rude. And I said, yeah, you got it, Mom. But how often have you and I ever sat with that teenager with addiction or that family in trouble, and in our heart we really know that they need something really different than our program funds? And yet you give them what you have, right? And you say, here, take it, And the reality is that as we begin to change that, as we begin to give all of you and all the people who work for you, there's a lot of supervisors in the room today, As we change funding flow, starting at the national level and all the way down to the municipalities, and we allow it to be much more individualized and much more flexible and much more culturally relevant to this family. As we change all that, and we have a process that we use whenever that family has complex needs across systems, adults and kids now, we get better outcomes. All right? Okay? And that's what we're finding. And again, there's no panacea, there's no magic answer, and anybody who tells you there is, you should send packing. There's no magic answer. But this seems to be working. That's why it's spread so rapidly, I think, in the U.S. and Canada. And so I want to share with you a little bit of research. And research, I got to say, you can take it or leave it. I'm not a researcher by trade, but I really think that we're learning from some of this research. So I want to show you two studies that are very important to the wraparound field right now. This was done in the state of Nevada. Y'all know Nevada, Las Vegas, it's all an exciting place, but this is Nevada. These are all child welfare children. 50% of these children had addiction in the child or in the parents of the children. Okay, so addiction is a big factor. Okay, many of these children had juvenile justice issues. Almost all of them had what we would call in the United States special education. They had education needs that were keeping them from being educated. Okay. There was random assignment into 3 groups. One was a control group of children that got typical mental health and child welfare services, typical behavioral health services, therapy, day treatment, maybe inpatient care, foster care, case management, typical services here on the right. In the middle was a group that got intensive case management services. Now, I don't know if you have that term here, but in the U.S. what it means is you have a low caseload. There's one adult to less than 10 children. That case manager has access to a flexible budget that they can use child by child by child. Now, I hope you understand what I'm talking about. We call this turbo case management. It's like case management with an engine on it. They've got money and they've got time to be with that family. They can buy a car for a family. They can put a room on a house. They can do anything that family needs if that family says they want it. Okay? On the left was high fidelity wraparound according to the U.S. National Wraparound Standards. It says this is real wraparound. There's a team. All right, we have a team, and that team is an integrated team across all of the services involved with the adults and kids in the family. It's got natural supports on it: the aunt, the uncle, the minister, or whatever, the neighbor, whatever it is. All right. Now, in this, the measure of change is called the CAFAS, which is a standardized instrument in the U.S. called the Child and Adolescent Functional Assessment Scale. Now, you may love or hate or even not even know of standardized instruments that you use in Norway. This is the dominant measure of functioning in the U.S. and Canada. Okay, so it's a very common measure of functioning. Now, with the CAFAS, Child and Adolescent Functional Assessment Scale, high scores are bad, low scores are good. So from a research terminology, if you see that 0 line right in the middle, each group of children got better over 6 months, and now we have a year and 2 years of data, but this is 6 months data. Each group of children got better. Now, again, back to that term, statistical significance. Now, what that term means is, yes, they got better, but not enough to notice. All right? If you were the mom or dad, you might look at your child and say, well, yeah, I guess they're a little better. All right? But you didn't really, not enough to really notice. So all groups got a little better. This group, 4.4 points, again, not statistically significant. The group in the middle, 7.5 points, still not statistically significant, although better. The group on the left dropped almost 29 points on this particular standardized test. Now, the point is not the test. The point is, for that group of kids, what they did was something very important, which they dropped out of clinical range. Now, what does that mean? They no longer could be diagnosed as having severe behavioral health problems. Literally, they were better, all right? They weren't diagnosable anymore, that group of kids, all right? When I saw this, I've spent the last 20 years on the road training and coaching and working after Alaska, after we were successful in Alaska. But when I saw this chart, it made 20 years of being on the road worthwhile. I've stayed in a lot of really bad hotels over the years, you know. This is a wonderful one here, so don't tell them I said anything about their hotel. But this really said that, my gosh, if we do this right, we can do what? We can make kids not diagnosable anymore. Isn't that what we're after, you know? You know, you ever hear the phrase, I don't know if you use the phrase in Norway, I'd like to work my way out of a job. I'd like it to be where I didn't have to do this with kids and families. Well, for me, it said, wow, okay, so what's the difference? Why such a huge difference between these three groups? This study has now been replicated nine times in the U.S. with similar results around the United States. But here's what we think is the difference. Over here, these are all standard services. But they're just piling service after service after service after service on this kid or family. Okay? In the middle, it's more individualized, but you know what there isn't? There isn't integration. You have collaboration, because there's a lot of collaboration in Nevada. You don't have integration, and you may have an intensive case manager who's has low caseloads and could do anything for a family, but there's a probation officer or a child welfare worker or a high school principal all off doing their own thing still. Okay? Only on the left do you have one team making one plan with one set of core values. All right? And I think that's why we see such a huge difference here. So, but this study, yes, please. Okay, it's a child and adolescent functional assessment scale. It measures day-by-day functioning of the child and family. Again, what is mental illness? What is addiction? What does trauma do to us? It stops our functioning. It reduces functioning. We don't do as well in life. And that's what it measures. The author of that scale is Kay Hodges. K-A-Y Hodges. Hodges. If you put it into Google on the internet, it'll pop right up. All right. So this study is really very important to you. Now, here's what it says, and I got to say, I've done a lot of training on Wraparound. People like Wraparound. That's why it's grown so fast all over the place. But most people will go out, and what they'll do is in the middle and call it Wraparound, because integration is so difficult. All right. And we don't get our outcomes that way. You'll say, well, I'm going to work with this family and I've got a flexible dollars. I'm going to do whatever this family needs. But because you don't have a team, you're losing a big piece of it. And that's the lesson of this research. Is if Wraparound is done well, we get outcomes that are very important. If not, we don't. Now, this is... Actually, I'm not going to do this because of time. All I can say is this is another Arizona study, or another study in Arizona that got similar outcomes, but I'm not going to go into it because of time. Okay. What is Wraparound on the street level? What does it look like out with the kids and families? Now, you're going to have to, because I don't know Norway, and I really apologize. All I know is what I've read, and Rune and others sent me materials. You're really going to have to tell me if there are pieces of this that don't make sense for your system. Now, in Canada, for example, as Canada began to adopt Wraparound, they made some modifications to it, and you'll see this tomorrow, that fit Canada a little better. So whatever you do, if you think about Wraparound, you can never take what we did in the U.S. and use it in Norway, ever. Why? Look at the differences in our society. Look at the difference in our poverty rates alone. There's huge differences in our societies, okay? But as I go through this, what I need you to be thinking of is what would we need to do to adapt this, and to have a very open mind about it. But you will have to adapt it, okay? Phase 1, we start with as the family comes into wraparound. Families, by the way, are referred from child welfare, juvenile justice, mental health, addiction services, domestic violence services, labor services, wherever families might be referred from. Families can self-refer to wraparound as well. In other words, a family might hear about wraparound from another family and call up somebody and it's typically a community like my community has wraparound coordinators, staff who manage wraparound on the behalf of the community. So we have a person whose job it is to manage these teams and make this happen. Now, I don't know if you have anybody like that position right now, but most states had to establish those jobs in order to do wraparound. So they were new jobs in the system. So that person, a wraparound facilitator, wraparound coordinator, whatever you want to call it, sits with the family that is referred and begins a process of engagement and team preparation. Now, why might a family not like us very much at that moment? A family might not like us very much because of their experience with us, right? In other words, if we've never had integration in our community, let's say it's here in Trondheim and you've got great collaboration and very little integration, and let's say that family has seen us as professionals, offering them lots of different things that don't fit all together. They view us as, and I know this from having spent time with a lot of families, they view us as insane. They just go, you told me one thing and you told me something else? And it's just, what's going on? You're crazy. But we lose face in their eyes, right? And they see us as not helpful. Now, if the family has been in therapy over and over and over and over again, and they sit with a professional, and that professional says to them, my recommendation for you is therapy, they start to see us as crazy, right? We lose face. Now again, I'm not anti-therapy. I spent 13 years in graduate school becoming one. So I'm not anti-therapy, but my point is, we often have to begin engagement with these families that is slow, and it's careful, and it's looking at their strengths and looking at who they are. We then begin talking to them about their team. Who could be on their team? Now, let me ask you this, and this is a cultural question for you, and I'm going to ask for another show of hands, so get ready. Okay. When I was raised, for example, my mom and dad gave us the cultural message that we take care of our own problems. We don't bring them to other families. Okay? That was our family culture, was we take care of our own problems. If my dad would have heard me complaining to a neighbor about something in our family, it would have been, So let me ask you this. How many of you would say, growing up, your family culture was more like mine, where it was we take care of our own problems? How many of you would say that? Well, the majority of you in the room, at least 90% of you in the room would say that. So when you go to a family and you say, do you want a team? Do you want a wraparound team? What do they say? Oh no. And that's where engagement comes in. And we say, well, your son is on the street, your son is addicted, there's domestic violence in the home, child welfare is involved. How's it going not having a team? Here's what it would look like if you had a team. And in the U.S., one of the things we've done now is we've taken families that have graduated wraparound, and we've hired those parents as staff into wraparound. Now in Oklahoma, for example, which is another one of our states, in Oklahoma, 50% of the wraparound staff are parents who are graduates of wraparound. In other words, so when the mom or dad says to you, I don't want a team, we take care of our own problems, you might say, well, my family was in wraparound and I didn't want a team either, and yet here's what a team gave us. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that thousands of volunteers are going to come out of the woodwork, because they're not, right? In our modern societies and everything moving along in technology, there's not as many volunteers as there was, 50 years ago, right? But the issue, again, remember, is can we build a team, not for every family in Trondheim or Norway, but for this family? Can we build a team for them? And the answer is yes, all right? And part of it is we begin engagement with that family. We talk to them about the teams, why it's important. We give them examples. If we ourselves were not a consumer, we introduce them to other consumers, okay? The next phase is planning, where we the team comes together and we do a plan. Phase 3 is we implement this. Phase 4 is we move into transition. We move out of wraparound. Now, I'm not going to go into these in depth. Say thank goodness for that, right? But these are the activities of wraparound. In bold, you see the phases: engagement and team preparation, initial plan development, implementation, and transition. And in the U.S., with our U.S. national standards, this is wraparound. And again, you'd have to change them or modify them or adapt them, as Canada has. But we orient the family to wraparound. We talk to them about it. We stabilize crises. If the family's in big trouble, if they don't have enough to eat, if they're scared, if they're living in an unsafe situation, there's no way we're going to move forward. The next step is we start talking to them about strengths, needs, culture, and the vision of the family. All right? Now later, when I get to do the little workshop, we'll talk more about that. Vision of the family, but strengths. Let's just talk about this. How many of you in this room just love to talk about your strengths to other people? One of the cultural lessons I got during the break was sometimes in Norway there's a sense of, I couldn't pronounce the word for it, but it's sort of like, I'm not going to just trot my strengths out and share it with everybody, right? You ever hear of that one? Let me give you an example of this. 12 years ago, when my mom was 77, she and my father were going to have to leave their farm. Okay, so we did a wraparound plan for them. It's like, why not? Because we asked them, what do you want? What do you want to have a better life? They said, we want to stay on our farm. But with her mental illness and his medical problems, they were going to have to leave and move to a elderly services type place, a nursing home type place. 12 years ago. So we said, well, let's try wraparound. So we got my brother and sister and the relatives and the neighbors, and we all formed a wraparound team around them. And by the way, they stayed on their farm until the summer of this year. We were able to keep them there for 12 years, and now they're in an assisted living environment, a little apartment type of environment in the city. But I started with my mother to ask her about her strengths. Now, if you want to have some fun, assess the strengths and culture of your own mother. And here she is, this little tiny woman, And I said, Mom, I'm having this conversation with her. I said, because the way we used to assess problems, we'd look for all the deficits and we'd assess and we'd diagnose and we'd write them down and we'd say, you have all these mental health problems. We put that same energy into assessing strengths and culture. And again, culturally, often there's a barrier that says, no, it's not a good idea to talk about strengths, It's not an idea to trot yourself out there. So I sat with my mother and I just said, Mom, what's your best quality as a mom? She said, now you have to understand, she had 7 sisters and 2 brothers. So it's a very large family of 10 children. And I said, Mom, what's your best quality as a mother? Just being a mom. She said, I was never that good of a mom. But your Aunt Betty, now she was a good mom. She's passed away. I said, that's fine, but okay, thank you. And I said, well, Mom, you're a great cook. I said, you're a wonderful cook, and here, you're really doing good. And where'd you learn to cook like that? Gee. And she says, Johnny, she says, I'm not a very good cook. Now, Aunt Margie, she was a good cook. She was a good cook, And then I said, well, okay, Mom, you're a quilter, and you do quilting here. It's patchwork quilts, and needlework and handwork. And I said, you won prizes, and you're the best, beautiful Dutch quilting, And I said, Where'd you learn that? And she said, "Oh, I'm not that good of a quilter, but now. And Edie, she was a quilter, right? So she's just deflecting my questions, right? She's not about to answer them, right? Part of this is religious culture. My mom is of religion that I left as a teenager. But in their religion, you never talk about your strengths. Because that would be bragging. That would be putting yourself on a pedestal, right? And every time I'd ask her a question, she would just deflect it like this. And I knew. And we say in Wraparound, if you don't have strengths in culture, you got nothing to build a plan on with. Your job is to find them, and you have to be persistent. So finally I said to her, "Mom, what makes your day happy? What makes your day happy?" She said, "Well, it's when I walk down the road to the mailbox, and there's mail in it from people I love." But she said about 5 years ago, everybody just quit mailing me. Nobody sends me letters anymore. Do you know why? Email. Right? Now, one thing you have to understand about my parents is they're from a fundamentalist Christian religion that is very conservative, and they don't believe in radio, television, and certainly not computers. All right? So they don't have any of that, you know. They don't even have a dishwasher. I mean, none of that stuff. It's crazy. So anyway, I said, "Oh, okay." She said, "Nobody sends you letters anymore because of email, and so you don't get any mail." And I said, "Okay." So that evening I called one of the ministers from their church. And I'd been out of this church now for many decades, you know. And I said to him, "Is it true that you don't allow radios?" "No radios." "Is it true you don't allow televisions?" He said, "No televisions." He said, Is it true you don't allow computers?" He said, "No, we allow computers, but only email. No surfing the web, none of that, just email only. Because we think Jesus Christ would have liked instant worldwide communication among his flock." Makes sense to me, you know. So I get up the next morning, I drive 50 miles to the nearest big town, I buy a computer, I bring it back, I set it up in their house, and my dad says, actually he freaked out, he just said, "Johnny, that's the devil, get it out of here," you know, and he was like, you know, like this, you know, and it is Bill Gates, you know, just, what can I say? But anyway, he's right, but the point is, I taught them how to use email. And if my mom were here today, and you were to ask her, what kept you together all these years, 12 years, until we could no longer keep them on the farm, of these 12 years, what kept you together more than anything? You know what she would say? It's those 10 to 15 emails she got every day from family and friends all over the place. You know, it's that constant support, all right? That, folks, is a strength-based plan. That's a strength-based intervention. You know, not that culturally confident because of the computer and all that, but culture changes, and it's her culture changing in her life to accept this innovation, all right? So what we do is we facilitate conversations about the strengths, needs, culture, and vision of the family, and we move forward with this family. The next thing we do is we engage potential team members, we make arrangements, and we move on to the plan of development, and eventually all the way through where we transition out of Wraparound. Now typically, for a very difficult child, let's say that the parents have got addiction issues themselves, there's domestic violence in the home, there's job issues, employment issues. You've got children with perhaps who have lived in violence themselves. Maybe they've spent time in foster care. For a very complex family, it's about a year from start to finish till they're graduated. That would be typical for a very complex family. But for many families, 5, 6 months, 7 months, right in that arena. Okay? But that's how Wraparound flows. And again, the person who manages this is a Wraparound facilitator or a Wraparound coordinator, right? Now, there are models of Wraparound out there where it's done by staff, like social workers who work for child welfare or staff who work for juvenile justice. But the dominant model in the U.S. is where we hire people to do this job on behalf of everybody in the community. Okay. On Friday, I get to meet and spend time with some of your system and supervisory people who are managing some of the systems here in Norway. And talk about money. And we're not here to talk about money right now, but I want to just talk about money a little bit. And the reason I talk about money is that we will always have more children and families than money. And clearly, even in a society like the Nordic countries, where you have more of a focus on welfare than we do in the States, it's still an issue. So money is an issue. And here's just an example of that. And this is from Wraparound in Kansas. Wraparound is actually saved $4.3 million in institutional costs, which then were put back out in the community. Those were saved and put back out to fund more Wraparound and supports. There was a formal evaluation done of Wraparound by the University of Kansas, Barfield, Holmes, Barkett, etc. And they were looking at, Wraparound was about $13,000 per year compared to about $26,000 per year for institutional care. So this study, which said that we were able to serve children for about half the rate we typically did in institutional care, has been very widely replicated in the U.S., and we've seen very similar results. Now, it's a little bit more data, which is focused on Wraparound Milwaukee. Now, Wraparound Milwaukee is our nation's biggest demonstration of Wraparound in a city of 1 million people plus. Milwaukee's about 1 million people in the surrounding areas. Has anybody in this room ever been to Milwaukee? All right, we have one person. All right, yeah. Right. But this is, to me, a very exciting bit of research. One of the reasons it's exciting is really is we've got 10 years worth of data on this. Now, what you have to understand, I'm not going to go into this in great depth, but in Milwaukee, they took all the child welfare and all the juvenile justice placements, kids that were placed in residential or institutional care, and they put that money in one pot and managed it. And every one of those children had co-occurring disorders, had needs across systems in the adults and kids in the family. And every one of them got a Wraparound team and a Wraparound supports. You can see with the red dotted line, in 96 we saw this begin to move forward. We saw the Wraparound begin to be done. And what you see, in 1996, there were, the average daily census was about 337 children in residential or institutional care. Now, all of Norway on institutional beds has less than 500 beds. So when you think about it, if I have that right, of mental health beds, less than 500 beds, all right, according to your government. So here we have one big city that has a lot of beds, right? So what they did, though, they began to put in Wraparound in place, and you see this dramatic reduction here to, in 2004, at any given time, the average daily census was 78. What was exciting is they took that $12 million and put it back into serving more youth in the community. And the goal now is to have Wraparound available for every single child and family in that community that has complex needs across systems. Okay? Now, I'm a little worried about time. I had 2 hours. Where am I at? About 10 minutes past? Oh, geez, that's what I thought. I get way too excited about this. Forgive me. I'm almost done. Hang on there. Just stick with me just a minute. Okay. Now, this is juvenile justice data. Now, juvenile justice kids. How many of you have ever worked hands-on with juvenile offenders, juvenile justice kids? Let me just see what kind of experience we have in the room. Not a lot. But what I'll tell you is, even though overall in your country and my country we've seen improving outcomes, these are tough kids to work with. And in Milwaukee, they looked at several areas: property offenses, other offenses, assaults, sex offenses, weapons offenses, and drug offenses. And they looked at, in the yellow bar, the year prior to Wraparound, blue bar, the year during Wraparound enrollment, and then the year after. Okay? Or, excuse me, during Wraparound was the blue bar, and then the year after was the way it was worked. You can see with this, you see some dramatic, statistically significant changes. The only one that was less was drug offenses. And to their own, Wraparound Milwaukee would tell you that they were not able to get participation of the drug and alcohol programs in the Wraparound, unfortunately. And the reason for that was in Wraparound, we tend to address addiction is only one of a whole bunch of symptoms that are going on with this family. Whereas in the U.S., traditional addiction services say, no, you deal with the addiction first before you do anything else. And there was really a gap between addiction services and the wraparound efforts. Consequently, we really didn't see the outcomes. Now, we have other research that has much better data on that vantage point. Okay? Okay. Well, I think that what I'm going to do is end on that one. So, I guess you're going to give instructions to the group, and probably in a language that I can't speak. So go ahead, all right? But thank you, folks. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Mr. VanDenBerg. Here's a small gift for you. We enjoyed your stay so far.
Yes,
I think.
absolutely.
I hope you noticed.
Thank you very much.